when it comes to 80s action movies, I think you always have to show some Jean Claude Van Damme in there somewhere at some point because he did have a pretty good little corner etched out for himself during that time. He was not on the level of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone, or Bruce Willis, but you know what? He still brought in some heavy hits. He still did some good movies. And you know what? The one I watched recently, Kickboxer, that came out in 1989. Dude, what in the world? Like, it's a strange movie, and it doesn't seem like it should work, but somehow it continues to just, you know, pull through with its style and with its overall story. And you know, why the freak not? Apparently, it turned over almost more than a $50 million profit. They made this movie for 1.5 million. That's pretty tiny actually, considering, and made almost $50 million in the box office. Like, how on earth? Like, that's 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 quite a good job. So, if you haven't seen Kickboxer, the very first one starring Jean Claude Van Damme, then I guess the simplest way to explain it is that it is pretty much Rocky 4, but in kickboxer style. Okay. You know, they have Jean Claude Van Damme, and his brother is the best. He's the number one champion at kickboxing in the world, at least in the United States. He's recognized as that. It's suggested that maybe he try out his skills in Thailand because that's where kickboxing was invented. The style is different, the training is different. So he's like, you know what? I am the best. Let's go over there. Let's do it. And his brother is his helper. Jean Claude Van Damme is his buddy, his brother. His helps him train all that stuff. He goes and tries to fight the best fighter, Tong Po, and he gets totally wrecked. And Jean Claude tried to tell him not to after he saw Tong Po kicking a pillar in the building with one leg and shaking it and moving it, breaking it slowly by kicking it all the time. Those Muay Thai fighters across the sea, these guys are nuts. Okay? If there's any like if you studied any of it in reality, that those guys are crazy, okay? It's super intense, okay? So they kind of bring that to reality a little bit, but the American fights Tong Po, gets his back broken, and he gets paralyzed. And Jean Claude, of course, vows revenge. So no one dies, but he's gonna honor his brother's legacy. And so the whole movie is just about Jean Claude Van Damme training in the jungle and discovering what it means to be a true warrior, so that he can have vengeance for his brother and reconcile the dishonor. Dishonor. And they use, again, it's basically Rocky. They have all these training sequences. It's actually a very slow, smooth, gradual improvement, and that's what I like about this movie. Actually, they take the time to show you the line of progression that this character has to go through, because he's not good enough yet. He's not good enough yet, and he has to step up the ladder and train harder. And there's a particular part in this movie where he's kicking, what is it, a coconut tree or just a palm tree, some kind of tree. Apparently the Muay Thai fighters actually do this. They kick trees until they can basically knock the tree over by kicking it. And throughout, there's like a sequence of him kicking the tree. He's getting better at it. He's making it shake a little more. But there's a sequence where his trainer is watching him, and he just, he like keeps like wincing, like, my leg hurts, And then his trainer says, you know what, take your bags and go home. You're not ready for this. And he's just like, well, what? What do you want me to do? You want me to break my leg on this stupid tree? And he says, get out. And he says, fine, fine. So he starts kicking the tree as hard as he can, finally knocks it over, and then falls down from the pain on his leg, and it's all busted up. I don't think he broke it, but like, there's actually some progress here that is made. There's a physical and there's a mental change to Jean Claude Van Damme's character, and it takes full advantage of his physicality. Okay, this is where Jean Claude has always been able to set himself apart from these other dudes. His ability to do the splits, his abilities with martial arts, but being such a big muscular presence at the same time. Like, he makes Jackie Chan and all those guys look tiny with his physique. And then, he's willing to put himself through a lot of physical um strain, just for the sake of making a good scene. On top of this, he also has this crazy emotional depth that's just so weird. I mean, because he's European, sometimes it just sounds dumb, and if the writing's poor, and again, when he was younger, he did this a lot better because he actually had something to prove, he was hungry for it, but there was an emotional depth he could bring, and there's an emotional vulnerability that he always had. He wasn't just this cold, steely character all the time, just like all the other guys. And for this character and for this movie, it worked out really well because you figure out that Tong Po, the fighter, he's in league with basically the whole fighting sector that is basically a bunch of gangsters who rig the fights in favor of Tong Po, and they kind of, abuse the local population for it. And so by fighting Tong Po, he's kind of fighting the establishment as well, the corrupt establishment. And so they don't want him to win anyway. And so it's freaking Rocky. It's just Rocky 4 with kickboxing. Um, but I don't want to give away all the details, but he trains real hard. He eventually manages to to be ready to take on Tong Po and not get his back broken like his brother did. And there are plenty of little fight sequences in the middle, but that happen, and the way that he gets trained, it's just entertaining to watch. They maintain a good pace with everything, and it's solid enough to keep you in it. So I do still think it's aged a little bit. I think anyone who wants to watch an 80s action movie, I think you got to throw Kickboxer in there. I think you'll have fun with it, if nothing else. Um, but it's not going to have the same production value. It's not going to have the same pizzazz that those other movies do. But, you know, I think there are a handful of. I'm not saying all the Jean Claude Van Damme movies are good. They're definitely not. Okay, they're pretty. Some of them are pretty terrible, but this one actually holds its own. It actually it plays within itself. There's plenty of cheesy moments, but it doesn't shake the movie up enough for it to fall apart. I think it stays together. I think that it stays interesting. I think that it stays, together enough to continue watching, and to end it by saying, you know what? That actually wasn't bad. Wasn't bad. So, Kickboxer, Jean Claude Van Damme, 1989. I recommend it.